a guy come in my office last week. He was telling me that the market was about to undergo a serious decline, like 1,000 points, and he wanted to talk about moving his whole portfolio to cash to avoid the drop. You know, it seems like at least once a year a client approaches me with this idea that they want to get out of the market because they feel like it's about to crash, or they want to get in the market because it's about to surge. This is what our industry calls market timing. So they come to me as their financial advisor and ask what I think. What do you say to somebody who's claiming with an implied certainty that something is going to happen in the future and that they're willing to bet lots of their own money on it? You know, it's easy to think that this behavior is limited to those with a specific personality trait or even a gambler's mentality, but it's not. Here's the thing. At some point or another, both you and I, we are going to have the same impulse. The question is, will we be able to recognize the ingredients that led up to the crossroads of that decision so that we do not act on this whim? I've heard it said that cooking is an art, but baking is a science. I found that to be true because in baking, the ingredients are not purely for taste, but they create a chemical reaction, like in a scientific experiment. The ingredients matter, and their quantities and their order affect the result. Ultimately, if we aren't accurate with the ingredients or the instructions, we can end up with a failed experiment instead of a perfect bread. You know, baking is like investment management. We work towards a successful outcome, like we want to retire and not run out of money or put our kids through college. Whatever it is, the results are dependent upon the ingredients that we put in. Some of those ingredients are the assumptions we make along the way. Every year, an organization called Dalbar conducts studies on human behavior as it relates to investing, particularly with respect to investors' competence in market timing. And every year without fail, they've concluded that people simply cannot successfully do it. In fact, they observe that the majority of investors end up chasing the market. They get in at the wrong time and they get out at the wrong time. Their conclusion is that investors can be their own worst enemies because their attempts at timing put them at greater risk than random chance. So if that's true, why do people persist in the notion that they can time the market? The possibility of anticipating short-term market moves has always captivated people's imaginations. If we knew the future, specifically how the market was going to respond, we could take advantage of these situations. The problem is that we don't know. But hope is a powerful force. It overrides even the most rational person's understanding of the facts. Many people simply ignore the probabilities in the hopes that they will defy them. So what are the ingredients in play here? What are the faulty assumptions that lead someone to behave outside rational boundaries? The first assumption is that predicting the market is possible, maybe even easy, but it's not. This ingredient is sometimes the hardest to recognize. For instance, the gentleman who came in my office, he was saying that the market was going to drop because our recent election was so contested. That makes sense, but unfortunately the market does not always respond to logic or common sense. In fact, sometimes it does the opposite, as it did in this case. Other times, by the time we have drawn these conclusions, the market has already absorbed that information, so it's too late. The second faulty assumption is that you only need to get one decision right in order to time the market, when in fact, you actually need to get two decisions right. If you get out, you have to figure out when to get back in, and that decision is equally important to your success. I have a friend that got out at the top of the market before the 2008 drop. He was so proud of missing the whole downturn. But the problem was that he never got back in. When the market recovered and rebounded, he was still sitting on the sidelines. He would have been better off riding it down and riding it back up. The third faulty ingredient or assumption is that we believe that we have control of our emotions when it comes to money. You know, there's this old adage on Wall Street: financial markets are driven by two powerful emotions, fear and greed. It's tricky because when the market's at its very bottom, people feel the worst. But you have to be optimistic enough at that very moment to go back in. There's an emotional fortitude that has to be present that often isn't. When you mix these three ingredients together in the form of assumptions, it causes serious errors in decision making. So the question is, how do we make sure that we don't succumb to an investment impulse that's going to lead us down the wrong path? This is where we can learn from professional bakers. Mise en place, the French culinary phrase that means everything in its place. It refers to the setup before cooking to make sure that you have the correct amount and type of ingredients so that you're well prepared and the outcome is ultimately what you expect. We've got to lay out in advance the ingredients that are baked into our thinking. However, it's easy to fall prey to our own internal impulses and not be able to recognize the ingredients. So for most of this requires bringing in someone else to the conversation who can be objective. That person should be able to help us see clearly all the assumptions. So my client who came in the office, well, the market never went down 1,000 points. In fact, it just went higher. But more importantly, I talked him out of attempting to time the market. Ultimately, the best things are made from the best ingredients. Before you give in to an impulse, take the time to review your assumptions first.